Welcome to Medieval India. Episode 14, Babar. In the month of Ramadan, in the Hijri year 899, in the 12th year of my age, I became ruler of the country of Fergana. So, abruptly, Babar begins the story of his adventurous life, and from the first to the last page of his thick volume, our interest in the man never for one moment flags, because it is a life filled with so much adventure that it can only very inadequately be captured in the few words I can bestow to it. Zahir-ud Din Muhammad, surnamed Babar the Tiger, was born in Fergana, his father's Khanate, in the valley of the Jaxartes as the Greeks knew it. It is now called the Kokand region of Uzbekistan, on the 14th of February 1483. He represented both the lines of the Turk and of the Mongol Tartars, and he numbered two great conquerors among his ancestors. On his father's line, he was in the direct line of Timur, while through his mother he descended from Genghis Khan. The early history of Zahir-ud Din Muhammad Babar, which was a succession of striking successes and surprising reverses, belongs to Central Asia. On the death of Sultan Abu Sa'id Mirza, a great-grandson of Timur and Babar's grandfather, his extensive dominions covering Khorasan and Transoxania were divided amongst his sons in 1469. His fourth son, Omar Shaikh Mirza, the father of Babar, obtained the kingdom of Fergana. Here the founder of the Mughal Empire was born. But Babar's father was not satisfied with this small dominion. So he quarrelled with his eldest brother, Ahmad Mirza, who had received the largest share of his father's dominions, namely Samarkand and Bukhara. In the midst of these quarrels, however, Umar Shaikh died of an accidental fall while feeding his pigeons in a wooden dovecot that collapsed on him. This happened on Monday, 8th of June, 1494. This unexpected death, from what should have been about the most harmless sport and pastime imaginable, synchronized with the invasion of Fergana by Babar's paternal and maternal uncles, Ahmad and Mahmud Mirza, respectively. Babar had just become 12, and he was saved by the withdrawal of his uncles, whose quarrel had been with his father, and not with Omar Mirza's infant boy. Rich but tiny Fergana, however, that weak child separated from the mother empire of Timur, could hardly satisfy the ambition of the young prince, whose dream was rather to rival Tamerlane and to conquer proud Samarkand, the capital of his great ancestor. It was to the west of Fergana, a city 5 miles in circuit, famed for its learned men as much as for its cuisine, and possessed of the great astronomical observatory that was built by Timur's grandson, Ulugh, and with celebrated colleges, baths, and mosques. After a hard struggle for 3 years against his cousin by Sunkur Mirza, Babar was able to capture it in November 1497, after a siege of 7 months. But he could hardly hold Samarkand for more than 100 days, as he had to forsake Samarkand for Fergana to quell a rebellion led by Auzun Khan and Ahmad Tambal, who acted in the name of his younger brother Jahangir Mirza. Babar failed in suppressing the uprising, and now As Samarkand also rose against him, he lost both places. Thus, for the sake of Fergana, I had given up Samarkand, and now found I had lost the one without securing the other, he later on wrote about it. Babar now became a wanderer for 2 years, but he recovered Fergana in June 1498 to lose it again in 1500, because of an attempt of his to restrain his greedy Mughal rascal troops, as he called his own soldiers himself, from plundering, and they then rose against him. It was a senseless thing, he writes afterwards, to exasperate so many men with arms in their hands. In war and in statecraft, a thing may seem reasonable at first sight, but it needs to be carefully weighed and considered in 100 lights before it is finally decided upon. Once more, therefore, he had to seek refuge by dangerous tracks among the rocks, as he wrote himself. He won Samarkand for the second time in November 1500 by a surprise strike. Not from any Timurid rival, but from Shaibani Khan, the chief of the Uzbek Confederacy. Shaibani was the grandson of a certain Abul Khair, a prince who united into one powerful confederacy the nomadic Uzbek tribes of the northwestern steppes in what is today Kazakhstan. That nascent Uzbek empire, which was however in turn but a rebirth of the empire of Chagatai, the second son of Genghis Khan, was wrecked by the rivalry between the wilder and the more restrained and conservative elements that composed it, and Shaibani, the hope of Abul Khair's house, was forced to seek service abroad to repair his shattered fortunes among the rival Timurid princes. With a small band of devoted followers, he hired himself out, now to one of the princes, now to the other, and meanwhile he ever increased his resources and ever pursued his own interests, ruthless and unscrupulous. Mahmud, the elder Khan, ruler of Tashkent, had made him governor of Turkestan. From that time forward, he came into prominence as the great enemy of the Timurids in general, and of Babar in particular. His power, his cunning, his cruelty made him a formidable opponent, and until the hand of death finally removed him, he was destined to constitute an insuperable barrier to the career of the young Prince von Fergana. For the next 12 years, Babar's life revolved round his struggle with the Uzbeks. In May 1501, he was badly defeated by Shaibani Khan at Zahir-ud, managed to slip out of besieged Samarkand himself, but was forced to surrender the city and give his eldest sister, Khanzada Begum, in marriage to the enemy. He was finally no more, once again, than a throneless wanderer, and retired to Tashkent under the shelter of his maternal uncle, Sultan Mahmud Khan. During my stay in Tashkent, he writes, I endured much poverty and humiliation. No country or hope of one. Most of my retainers dispersed. Those who were left were unable to move about me because of their destitution. If I went to my uncle's gate, I went sometimes with only one man, sometimes with two. It was better he was no stranger, but one of my own blood. With his two uncles, Mahmud Khan and Ahmad Khan, he made several attempts on Fergana. but Ahmad Bal, finding himself no match for such a Timurid-Mongol coalition, invited Shaibani Khan, who ultimately inflicted a crushing defeat upon the two Khans, the uncles of Babar, in the Battle of Archian, June 1503. That Battle of Archian molded the future history of Babar. It gave a new orientation to his ambitions and his policy. He now bade a last farewell to the land of his birth and set out to try his fortunes beyond the Hindu Kush, away from the grasp of his arch enemy, Shaibani. He was followed by no more than 200 and less than 300 men with clubs in their hands and with tattered clothes on their back. He writes. There were only 2 tents for the whole party. Babar gave his own to his mother, who had managed to evade Shaibani and rejoin her son. In a garden he was once hankering and awaiting for death, but in a dream he heard predictions that I would soon find life and fortune. He indeed found life and fortune in Kabul, which had been captured in 1501 by Mughal Argun from its legal ruler, Abdur Razzaq, grandson of Ulugh Beg, who had inherited it from his father, Sultan Abu Sa'id. In October 1504 he crossed the Hindu Kush and took Kabul away from the usurper almost without any opposition. The capture of Kabul turned to be a turning point in Babar's career. He had now a base from which he could turn his attention either northwest to Samarkand or southeast to Hindustan. It was at Kabul that he first had felt the lure of the fertile plains of India, like Sebuktigin had so long ago. Kabul is, he says, the intermediate point between Hindustan and Khorasan. This did not mean the abandonment of his ambitions in Central Asia. It was not by choice, but only by force of circumstance, that the grandson of Abu Sa'id would finally lay the foundation of an empire in Hindustan. A few months after the conquest of Kabul, Babar first invaded Hindustan. In January 1505, he set out by the Khyber Pass for Peshawar, and instead of crossing the Indus, he marched on to Kohat. From Kohat, he marched towards Bangash and finally reached the Indus at Tarbila. This raid, which was confined to fighting the Pathans and ravaging the banks of the Indus, lasted 4 months. In May 1505, Babar returned to Kabul by way of Ghazni. The alarming growth of the power of Shaibani Khan, who had captured Khiva and was threatening Balkh, at last moved Sultan Husayn Mirza Baikara, the renowned king of Herat, to call on all the Timurid princes for a joint attack on their common Uzbek foe. Babar hastened from Kabul to respond to the invitation, but on the way he was told Sultan Mirza Baikara had died, 5 May 1506. He pushed on all the same, and after a march of 800 miles he met on 26 October the 2 sons of the late Sultan on the river Murghab, and he accompanied them to Herat. To Babar, Herat was the home of culture and comfort. In the whole habitable world there was to him no such another city. But his object in going there was not to visit the sights, as he always did at every place he went to, as rather to see if he could secure help in making yet another effort against Shaibani. He, however, soon realized that that brave barbarian from the north was not to be vanquished by men of the Baikara stamp. Babar himself though only 24 years old, was meanwhile a seasoned warrior and an experienced ruler. The two Mirzas, somewhat older than himself, were cultured and charming people, but they possessed little notion of ruling a kingdom and none of conducting a military campaign. He left them on 24 December for Kabul, undertaking the perilous journey back through the snow-clad passes with such sufferings and hardships as I have scantily endured at any other time of my life, as he wrote about that trip. On his return, he put down a conspiracy of the Mongol troops to place his cousin Wais Mirza, son of Sultan Mahmud Mirza, on the throne. Shaibani Khan did not miss the golden opportunity of internal divisions amongst the Timurids by attacking Khorasan, and he took Herat in June 1507. The arch-enemy of Babar was now at the height of his power, and he had humbled the Mongols as well as the Timurids. It was a critical juncture for the Prince of Kabul, the one Timurid state that had survived the fall of Herat. Babar, who was fully alive to the strategic importance of Kandahar, responded to the call of Shah Beg and Mukim Beg, the sons of Zahir-ud Din Babar, governor of Kandahar under Sultan Husain Baikara, for military aid against the Uzbeks. As he approached Kandahar, Babar found the Arkoon princes hostile, but he took the city and put them to flight. He had soon to leave Kandahar, however, as Shaibani Khan was hastening towards the city at the invitation of the fugitive Mukim. Babar deemed it better to stay away from the Uzbeks and diverted his energies to making a raid into Hindustan. Shaibani took Kandahar but left to the north because of a rebellion of one of his chiefs. It was after the retirement of Shaibani from Kandahar and on his return to Kabul that Babar abandoned the title of Mirza, prince he had so far used, and styled himself Padishah, emperor instead, and thus formally asserted the headship of the illustrious legacy of the Timurids. The birth of his son Humayun gave the death blow to the partisans of the house of Ulugh Mirza, who organized a formidable rebellion in favor of Abdur Razak, but Babar defeated them and put them to flight. The rest of the year 1508 and the whole of the next year he spent quietly in arranging the internal economy of his petty kingdom. In 1510, the perpetual menace to Babar by the ever-increasing power of Shaibani was suddenly removed. The latter came into conflict with Shah Ismail, the new Safavid ruler of Iran, and he was badly defeated. Shaibani was killed and his army was annihilated. This news raised high hopes in the mind of Babar. He could now expect to recover all his lost territories. Leaving Nasir Mirza in charge of Kabul, he reached Kunduz in January 1511. Here he received an embassy from the Safavid king, who offered him friendship and sent back his sister, Khanzada Begum, who had been taken captive by the Uzbeks and had fallen into the hands of the Persians. Babar sent Wais Mirza back to Iran with congratulations, thanks and presents. The Shah agreed to help Babar on condition that he would read the Shah's name in the Friday prayer and stamp it on his coins together with those of the 12 Imams. In other words, that he would make Shi'ism state religion. With Persian help, Babar indeed took Bukhara. His cousin, Haidar Mirza, had already driven the Uzbeks out of Fergana. The road to Samarkand now lay open, and from Bukhara, Babar marched directly on the capital of Timur, and he proclaimed himself king amidst popular rejoicings. As he said, in the midst of such pomp and splendor as no one has ever seen or heard before, or ever since. End quote. But his popularity soon waned in Sunni Samarkand, which bitterly disliked his concessions to Shiism in his compact with the Persian Shah. Uzbeks, now under command of Ubayd Ullah Khan, nephew of Shaybani, then took advantage of Shah Ismail's preoccupation with his conflict with the Ottoman Empire in Azerbaijan and the growing coolness between him due to Babar's clear insincerity in his profession of Shiism. Ubayd Ullah Khan attacked Bukhara and Babar thereupon marched out against the Uzbeks. But he was defeated at Kul-i-Malik in the vicinity of Bukhara in March 1512. With it, Babar lost not only Bukhara but also Samarkand to the Uzbeks, and he retired to Hisar in Badakhshan. Shah Ismail had meanwhile sent an army under Najim Bek to assist Babar against the Uzbeks. The combined forces of Najim Bek and Babar marched towards Bukhara. The Uzbeks had entrenched themselves in the fort of Ghazdawan, which Najim Bek besieged, but the garrison was well provisioned against the long siege, while the Persian troops badly suffered from winter and scarcity. Najim Bek thereupon decided to raise the siege and withdraw, as Babar and others had advised him. But the next day, the Uzbek army, greatly reinforced, suddenly attacked the Persians. They were thrown into confusion and badly defeated, and Najim Bek was slain. That was in November 1512. Babar, who had been in command of the rear guard, once again escaped to Hisar. From there, where the Mongol troopers had rebelled against him, he went to Kunduz. But as he had no hope of recovering Hisar, he crossed the Hindu Kush and now returned to Kabul. For the next 4 years, the history of Babar was comparatively uneventful. He was now merely the chief of a petty kingdom. Central Asia was lost to him. He was no match for the Uzbeks, especially after Shah Ismail's tragic defeat at Khaldiran near Tabriz in August 1514 at the hands of the Ottoman Turks, who mainly routed him due to their mastery of firearms. Babar then determined on his part to imitate the Ottomans, and sometime between 1514 and 1519, as there is a gap in his memoirs in this period, he secured the service of an Ottoman Turk named Ustad Ali, who became his master of ordnance. Indeed, it is hardly too much to say that this day marked the beginning of Babar's immortality. If there was one single material factor which, more than any other, was conducive to his ultimate triumph in Hindustan, it was his powerful artillery. For militarily, he had, though he had surely gathered a lot of experience, been a failure so far, and the life of Babar, since he had succeeded his father in his 12th year, could so far be summed up in the anecdote of the aunt, which is commonly ascribed to Babar's great-grandfather Tamerlane. Quote, "I was once forced," says he, "to take shelter from my enemies in a ruined building. To divert my mind from my hopeless condition, I fixed my eyes on an ant which was carrying a grain of wheat up a high wall. 69 times it fell to the ground, but the insect persevered and the 70th time it reached the top. That sight gave me courage, and I never forgot the lesson." End quote. Like the aunts, Babar was too optimistic ever to despair and too ambitious to remain inactive, and he now turned his eyes from Kabul towards the southeast as a possible compensation for his lost dominions in the northwest. As he wrote, "From the year 910 Hijri, when I obtained the principality of Kabul, up to the date of the events I now record," that is the defeat of Sultan Ibrahim Lodi, "I had never ceased to think of the conquest of Hindustan. But I had never found a suitable opportunity for undertaking it, hindered as I was, sometimes by the apprehensions of my nobles or begs, sometimes by disagreements between my brothers and myself. Finally, all these obstacles were happily removed. Great and small, begs and captains, no one dared say a word against the project. So in 925 I left at the head of my army and made a start by taking Bajau. From this time to 932 I was always actively concerned in the affairs of Hindustan. I went there in person at the head of an army 5 times in the course of 7 or 8 years. The 5th time, by the munificence and liberality of God, there fell beneath my blows an enemy as formidable as Sultan Ibrahim Lodi, and I gained the vast empire of Hind. In Hind, as I said in episode 12, the position of Ibrahim Lodi was growing more and more precarious because of the revolt of his nobles and relatives. The most serious enemies of the Sultan were Alam Khan, his uncle, and Daulat Khan Lodi, viceroy of the Punjab, both of whom appealed to Babar for help. Alam Khan, who had been living at the court of Sultan Muzaffar of Gujarat, went to Kabul and begged Babar to advance to the Punjab and place him on the throne of Delhi. Daulat Khan, apprehending that Sultan Ibrahim would soon deprive him of his position, sent a messenger to Babar, offering to acknowledge him as a sovereign and asking his aid against Ibrahim Lodi. Babar responded to Daulat Khan's appeal and undertook his 6th invasion of Hindustan in 1524. Christian era. Passing through the Khyber Pass and the Kaka country, Babar crossed the Indus, the Jhelum and the Chenab and advanced within 10 miles of Lahore. There he was encountered by the Lodi army under Bihar Khan, Mubarak Khan and other leaders. The Afghan army was defeated and Lahore fell into Babar's hands. He then pushed on southwards to Dipalpur, which he stormed. Here he was joined by Daulat Khan and his son Ghazi Khan and Dilawar Khan, who had been driven from Lahore. Babar gave Daulat Khan Jalandhar and Sultanpur as his assignments. This could hardly satisfy Daulat Khan, who wanted the free hand in the Punjab. He had sought an ally, but he had found a master, and along with his son Ghazi Khan, he left Babar and began to intrigue against him. Babar was proceeding eastwards towards Sirhind, but considering his forces inadequate, he finally retreated to Lahore and then to Kabul. No sooner had Babar left them than Daulat Khan came out of his retreat and seized Sultanpur. Alam Khan, who still harped on his claims to the throne of Delhi, escaped to Kabul and offered Babar the formal cession of Lahore and the territory west of it on condition that Babar would place him on the Delhi throne. The king of Kabul accepted the offer and sent instructions to his generals in the Punjab to help Alam Khan in his attack on Delhi. Babar could not accompany Alam Khan to Hindustan, however, as he had to go to Balkh to the aid of Shah Ismail against the Uzbeks who had besieged it. Therefore, Alam Khan, after his return to India, abandoned the alliance with Babur and joined hands with Daulat Khan, who offered him his help and allegiance. With the assistance of Daulat Khan and his son Ghazi Khan, Alam Khan marched on Delhi and surprised Ibrahim Lodi's camp at night, but he was ultimately routed all the same. With his army dispersed, Alam Khan escaped. Babur, meanwhile, had driven the Uzbeks from Balkh and now turned his attention to Hindustan. On 17 November 1525, he set out on his last and most momentous Indian campaign. On the way, he was joined by his son Humayun, who was coming from Badakhshan. When he crossed the Indus on 16 December, the entire army amounted to 12,000 men. As Babur advanced towards Sialkot, Daulat Khan and Ghazi Khan, who were overrunning the Punjab, escaped to Miran. Babur blockaded the strong fortress and forced Daulat Khan, who had girded himself with 2 swords as a challenge against the invader, to capitulate. Alam Khan Lodi also joined Babur in a forlorn condition, and Babur considered it expedient to make political use of this Afghan pretender to the throne. Lahore and its dependent territories fell into Babur's hands, and with that the first stage of his campaign was brought to a close. The road to Delhi lay open. He noted in his diary for 1519 that, quote, "the people of Hindustan, and particularly the Afghans, are a strangely foolish and senseless race, possessed of little reflection and less foresight. They can neither persist in and manfully support a war, nor can they continue in a state of amity and friendship." End quote. Plus à changer, some might say. And Babur noted as his impression of the country, quote, "The country and towns of Hindustan are extremely ugly. All its towns and lands have a uniform look. Its gardens have no walls. The greater part of it is a level plain. The banks of its rivers and streams, in consequence of the rushing of the torrents that descend during the rainy season, are worn deep into the channel of the rivers, which make it generally difficult and troublesome to cross them. In many places the plain is covered by a thorny brushwood, to such a degree that the people of the provinces, relying on those forests, take shelter in them, and trusting to their inaccessible situation, often continue in a state of revolt, refusing to pay their taxes." Later on, he lamented the absence of ice and cool baths, and considered a gang of dirty fellows with small oil lamps a poor substitute for candles and candlesticks. On the 12th of April, 1526, Babur's army of 24,000 men faced that of Sultan Ibrahim Lodi, that likely numbered 50,000 men and 2,000 war elephants. But the entire force of Sultan Ibrahim was disgusted and vexed with his previous evil deeds. On the eve of this battle of Panipat, when his anxiety was great due to facing a foreign people, Babur recited offhand a Persian verse which he had composed on the spot, that portrayed a picture of his foe and of his own anxieties. Quote, "Our disturbed band with a disturbed mind in the midst of a people quite unfamiliar." On one side were the courage of despair and some resources of the most modern warfare. On the other side were men at arms of the medieval type, with crowded ranks of spearmen and archers thronging in foolhardy disorder. The disparity in numbers was to an appreciable extent balanced by the Mughal strength in artillery, but Babar's greatest asset may be described in his own words, quote, Sultan Ibrahim was a young man of no experience. He was negligent in all his movements. He marched without order, retired or halted without plan, and engaged in battle without foresight. And he was too miserly to raise additional forces or even to pay his troops in the field. The Mughal commander employed the time allowed him before the battle in preparing an entrenched position, strengthened with foreseen breastworks and weapons. Then, at the dawn of the morning of the 21st of April, Babar's patrols reported that the enemy was advancing to the attack. Babar, in his campaigns, adopted the tactics of the Ottoman Turks, then the most formidable military power in the world. Ibrahim's army came on in mass, but under showers of arrows, the steady musketry of the matchlock men and the well-directed artillery fire, the Afghan army failed to break the Mughal line. They began to waver, and Babar then called upon his cavalry reserves to get round the enemy's flanks and charge them in the rear. And then, writes Babar, quote, our right, left, center and turning parties, having surrounded the enemy, rained arrows down on him and fought uncrutchingly. He made one or two small charges on our right and left, but under our men's arrows fell back on his own center. His right and left flanks were massed in such a crowd that they could neither move forward against us nor force a way to fight. End quote. Babar then ordered his whole line to advance. Ibrahim Lodi himself was standing with some of his men near him when his commander Mahmud Khan came forward, and he said to him, according to the Lodi Chronicle, quote, our affairs are in a very desperate condition. You had better leave the field of battle. If the king is saved, it will be easy to find another army and again make war against the Mughals. We shall soon be able to find an opportunity of accomplishing our wishes. This is my opinion, but whatever His Majesty thinks is best. However, Sultan Ibrahim replied to that, quote, O Mahmud Khan, it is a disgrace for kings to flee from the field of battle. Look here, my nobles, my companions, my well-wishers and friends have partaken the cup of martyrdom. One has fallen here, another there. Where then can I turn now? My horse's legs are dyed with blood up to the chest. While I was king, I governed the empire as I pleased. Now perfidious fortune has sided with the Mughals. What further pleasure is there in life? It is better that I should be like my friends, in the dust and in the blood. The chronicle then pursues, on saying this, he, the Lodi king, rushed into the thicket of the fight with 5,000 brave horsemen, who were all that remained of his best troops, and he slew many of the Mughals. After which, towards the close of the day, he obtained martyrdom. 16,000 of the Afghan army were killed in action, and 5,000 men lay dead round Ibrahim Lodi. By launching his cavalry in hot pursuit, Babar gave the beaten army no opportunity to rally. Babar followed up his victory by the immediate dispatch of a flying column to occupy Agra, while he settled the civil and military administration of Delhi himself and took over the treasury. Before he entered Agra, which was to be his new capital, in triumph, early in May, he spent a few quiet days visiting the tombs, palaces and gardens in and around Delhi. With the great cities of Delhi and Agra in the victor's hands, the Afghan dynasty was at an end. But Mughal rule in northern India was still far from secure, and Babar was immediately confronted with a danger from within which might still have ruined his enterprise. The fierce heat of an Indian May was taking a heavy toll amongst the ranks of an army drawn from the uplands of Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. And while the generals made outspoken protests to their leaders, the men began openly to demur and prepare to go back to Kabul again. It was like Alexander the Great's retreat when faced with mutinous troops nearly 2,000 years before. But the story had a different outcome this time. Said Babar, quote, "I no sooner heard this murmuring amongst my troops than I summoned all my Beks to a council. I told them that by divine power I had routed my most formidable enemy and achieved the conquest of the numerous provinces and kingdoms which we at presently held. And now what force compels and what hardship obliges us, without any visible cause, after having worn out our lives in accomplishing the desired achievements, to abandon and flee from our conquests, and to retreat back to Kabul with every symptom of disappointment and discomfiture. Let not anyone who calls himself my friend ever henceforward make such a proposal. But if there is anyone among you who cannot bring himself to stay, or give up his purpose of returning back, then let him depart." End quote. Having made this fair and reasonable proposal, the discontented were of necessity compelled, however unwillingly, to renounce their seditious purposes. It was now possible to deal with the present external problems. The great Afghan fiefholders were naturally hostile to the prospect of Mughal rule, but Babar gradually induced the majority to make their submission by a characteristic display of clemency and tact. But the grave danger still threatened from without, from the Rajput Confederacy. The Hindus were headed by the gallant veteran warrior Raja Sankrama Singh of Mewar, one of the greatest of the princes of Chittor, the conqueror of Mahmud of Malwa. He was, writes Todd of him, the representative of a family, the Sisodias, which, by universal consent of the Rajputs, was allowed the preeminence among all the Rajput tribes as the most ancient and the noblest. Like Babar, he had been educated in the school of adversity. After overcoming the many difficulties and dangers of his early life, when he at length mounted the throne, he had carried on successful wars with his neighbors on every side, and added largely to his hereditary dominions. From Sultan Mahmud Khalji, the king of Malwa, whom he defeated in battle, took prisoner, and honorably entertained in a spirit worthy of the best days of chivalry, he had wrested the wide and valuable provinces of Bilsa, Sarangpur, Chandri and Ranthambore. He had engaged in hostilities with Sultan Ibrahim of Delhi, and he twice had met the Sultan himself in pitched battle. The princes of Marwar and Amber did him homage, and the Raus of Gwalior, Ajmer, Sikri, Raisan, Kalpek, Chandri, Bundi, Kagraon, Rampura and Abu all served as his tributaries or held of him in fief. His personal figure corresponded with his deeds. He exhibited at his death but the fragment of a warrior. One eye was lost in a broil with his brother, an arm in an action with the Lodi king of Delhi, and he was a cripple owing to a limb being broken with a cannonball in another fight." End quote. Under his rule, as Babar wrote, the infidel standards dominated some 200 towns in the territories of Islam. In them mosques and shrines fell into ruin. From them the wives and children of the faithful were carried away captive. So greatly had his forces grown that according to the Hindu calculation by which 100,000 subjects should yield 100 horsemen, the territories subjected to this pagan Sangrama should yield him 100,000 horse. Many noted pagans who had hitherto not helped him in battle now swelled his ranks out of hostility to the people of Islam. He took to the field with 7 great Rajas, 113 lesser chiefs, 80,000 horse and 500 war elephants. Early in February 1527, Babar marched out to meet them with his heavily outnumbered force. The odds against them greatly disheartened the Mughal troops, but Babar rose to the emergency with courage and resolve. After pledging himself to renounce the wine, to which he had been formerly much addicted, to stiffen the sinews, and the resolve of his men, Babar made a stirring appeal to them in the following words, quote, "Noblemen and soldiers, every man that comes into this world is subject to dissolution. How much better is it to die with honor than live with infamy? Allah Most High has been gracious in giving us this destiny, that if we fall, we die as martyrs. If we conquer, we triumph in His holy cause. Let us swear with one accord that by the great name of God, we will never turn back from such a death, or shrink from the stress of battle till our souls are parted from our bodies." And then the men all took oath after him on the Koran that none will even think of turning his face from this warfare, nor desert from this battle, till his soul, the armies, met at Kanwa near Sikri on the 16th of March 1527. And once more the fate of Hindustan hung in the balance. Nay, this battle was more important than Panipat, for had Rana Sangrama Singh won, he might have founded a lasting Hindu empire in North India and entirely reversed the course of Indian history. Babar wrote of the battle, quote, "Obeying the cautions of prudence, we imitated the Ghazis of Rome, the Ottoman Empire, by posting matchlock men and culverins along the line of cars, which were chained to one another in front of us. Such stones Ustad Ali Kuli discharged at the ironclad elephant fortresses of the pagan ranks, and by this discharge of stones and abundance of culverins and matchlocks he destroyed many of the body of the pagans. The matchlock men of the royal centre, in obedience of orders, going from behind the carts into the midst of battle, each of them made many a pagan taste the poison of death. The pagan right wing made repeated and desperate attacks on the left wing of the army of Islam, falling furiously on the holy warriors, possessors of salvation. But each time they were made to turn back or smitten with the arrows of victory so as to descend into hell. As the conflict and battle lasted long, an imperative order was issued that the special royal corps, who, heroes of one hue, were all standing like tigers enchained behind the carts, should go out on the right and left of the centre, leaving the matchlock men posted in between and join battle on both sides. As the true dawn emerges from its cleft in the horizon, so they emerged from behind the cars. They poured a ruddy crepuscule of the blood of those ill-fated pagans on the nadir of heavens, that battlefield. They made fall from the firmament of existence many heads of the headstrong, as stars fall from the firmaments of heaven, and they betook themselves to the rear of the host of dark pagans. While then, at the Battle of Panipat, the battle was won mainly by a time-hallowed wheeling movement of mounted archers, a tactic the Scythians might have used 2,500 years before. This battle against great odds was won by cutting-edge technology. The Mughal matchlocks and guns and those new weapons routed the Rajput confederacy. Writes the chronicler Badauni nearly 100 years later on the slaughter, quote, "Pile over pile was formed of the dead, and the heap which remained exposed became a morsel of the raven and the kite, and in the space of the 2 generations that has elapsed since that occurrence to the time of this abridged history, the sound of strike and kill still reaches the ears of the audience from that plain." And the compiler of these pages also, one morning, while travelling from the city of Lahore towards Fatehpur, came to cross that plain, and the same frightening sounds came to the ears, and the party that bore company thought that perchance an enemy had appeared. What I had heard I saw. End quote. Hardly a clan of the Rajputs was there, but they had lost the flower of their princely blood. Rana Sangama himself escaped badly wounded. The heads of the gallant Rajputs, who had been sent to the air, were built into a ghastly tower, and Babar, as previously stated, assumed the title of Ghazi, or victor in a holy war. Sangrama got back to his own country, bent on raising another army, but he was there to be poisoned by his own minister. But the military power of the Rajputs was broken, and Babar, advancing into the country, took the stronghold of Chandari in spite of its obstinate defense. Babar commissioned his officers to subjugate the rest of the country and sent them in various directions with small forces to help them. These little bands fought with utmost zeal, conscious that they were making their own fortunes, while at the same time the territories thus acquired represented an extension of the dominions of their master. The next 2 years were spent in securing the eastern borders by operations against the Afghan rulers of Bihar and Bengal. Babar had now established an empire stretching from the Oxus to the Bengal frontier and from the foot of the Himalaya to Gwalior. But he did not live to conquer Bengal, Gujarat or the Deccan, and as he admitted himself, "I had no time to send proper persons to occupy and protect all the different parganas, provinces and stations." Babar was too much preoccupied with war, with sport, with conquest and with poetry to devote any serious attention to the administrative arrangement of the vast dominions he had now acquired. And to organize conquest and to organize administration are 2 altogether different things. The latter calls for genius of an altogether different sort, and few good soldiers are made of the stuff to make good bureaucrats too. Generally, soldiers find administrative affairs boring, and few administrators Fancy the hardships of military life. Sher Shah, although he was the best soldier of his time, and Akbar possessed the administrative spark, but Babar did not. These were the principles of kingly conduct that he had inculcated in Humayun. Quote, court danger and hardship, and show valor in arms. Shun indolence and ease as unbecoming of a king. Consult the begs and ministers. Avoid private parties. Call the court to public levées twice every day. Keep up the strength and discipline of the army. End quote. And this exhausted Babar's kingly code. No word about tax gathering or about administrative procedure. If everything is settled in Hindustan, he had written to Khwaja Kalam, his caretaker in Afghanistan, I shall set out for your quarters, God willing, without losing a moment. How can the delights of those lands ever be erased from the heart? How can someone like me, who has vowed abstinence and purity of life, possibly forget the delicious melons and grapes of that happy land, Afghanistan? The other day they brought me a muskmelon. As I cut it up, I felt a deep homesickness and sense of exile from my land, and I could not help weeping. End quote. Accordingly, he set out and went as far as Lahore, where he met his younger son, Kamran. And he was disappointed at Humayun's failure against the Uzbeks. He had recalled Hindal, his youngest son, from Kabul. But the strain of his ceaseless campaigns, wanderings, and early drinking excesses had told upon him heavily, despite all his extraordinary energy and strength. He had been known to take up a man under each arm and run with them round the battlements of a fortress, leaping the embrasures, and even in March 1529 he notes, quote, I swam across the river Ganges for amusement. I counted my strokes and found that I swam over in 33 strokes. I then took breath and swam back to the other side. I had crossed by swimming every river I had met except only the Ganges. End quote. He was also perpetually in the saddle, riding 80 miles a day sometimes, and the rapidity of his marches was often amazing. The story of his death, as told by his daughter Kulbadan Begum, Princess Rold's buddy, is well known. His son Humayun was dangerously ill, and in that state he was carried from Sambal to Delhi. Hearing of this, Babar tenderly expressed to Mahan, Humayun's mother, quote, although I have other sons, I love none as I love your Humayun. I crave that this cherished child may have his heart's desire and live long, and I desire the kingdom for him, because he has not his equal in distinction. End quote. And Babar then decided to save him by performing the Eastern rite of circumambulation, which is still used in Persia. The efficacy of this rite depends upon the offering of the most treasured possession, and Babar swept aside the suggestion that he should sacrifice the great diamond he had captured at Delhi, and which, as he wrote, Alauddin must have brought with him from Devakiri. Its reputation is that every appraiser has estimated its value at 2.5 days' food for the whole world. Nadir Shah, in the 18th century, first called it the Queen Nur, the Mountain of Light. He took it with him to Persia. It was captured by the Durrani Afghans later on, and later on taken from them by Ranjit Singh's Sikhs, and captured from them by the British and sent to the Tower of London, from which nothing ever escapes. Walking round his son's sickbed, he rather prayed, quote, O God, If a life may be exchanged for a life, I, who am Babar, give my life and my being for Humayun." End quote. His prayer was answered. Humayun at once recovered, and 3 months later all that was mortal of Zahir-ud Din Babar was carried to Kabul to be buried in the garden he loved. And it was buried there in the sweetest spot on a hillside, amidst beloved surroundings, a cool running stream, and fragrant flowers. And on his grave was inscribed, "Death made no conquest of this conqueror, for now he lives in fame." Babar rose from a homeless wanderer to the ruler of an empire that was equal to that of his contemporaries Suleiman the Magnificent or Charles V, and unlike them, he attained it not by birth, but entirely by the force of his personality, by his courage, cheerfulness, and endurance. But his place in eternal remembrance is assured not by his daring adventures and persevering efforts of his earlier days, as by the delightful memoirs in which he related them. Soldier of fortune as he was, Babar was a man of fine literary taste and fastidious critical perception. His battles, as well as his orgies, were always humanized by the breath of poetry. And he is frankly the only great conqueror of history I can think of who would have made a great writer and poet in his own right. As a writer of his own, the estimate of his cousin and companion Mirza Haidar is invaluable. Quote, "In the composition of Turki poetry, Babar was second only to Amir Ali Shir Nawai, present national poet of Uzbekistan. He has written a divan in the most music Turki. He invented a style of verse called Mubayan, and he was the author of a most useful treatise on jurisprudence, which has been generally adopted. He also wrote an essay on Turki prosody, more eloquent than any other, and versified the Rasala-i Validia. Then there is his Wakai, or Turki memoirs, written in a simple, unaffected, yet pure style. He excelled in music and other arts as well. Though far from a statesman and very far from a bureaucrat, Babar was undoubtedly a man of outstanding genius, a lover of fine arts, a born naturalist, a keen and critical observer of men and things, and an accomplished writer who has immortalized himself not merely as the founder of one of the most, and likely the most, glorious dynasties that have ruled India, but also as the prince of autobiographers by bequeathing to posterity his memoirs, which abound in descriptions of the countries he visited, their scenery, climate, production, and works of arts and industries, more full and accurate than will, perhaps, be found in equal space in any modern traveller, and considering the circumstances in which they were compiled, truly extraordinary. He was an admirable horseman, a fine shot, a good swordsman, and a mighty hunter, but above all he possessed in an eminent degree the supreme virtues of a born leader of men. He enjoyed with and he suffered with his men, and he knew and sympathized with every man in his army, officer as much as private. And what is equally necessary in a commander of armies, he correctly caught both the strength and the weaknesses of the commanders and armies that were opposed to him. And to his born courage he added the unbending tenacity of his will and the unquenchable fire of his ambitions. He himself says, Filled as I was with the ambition of conquest and broad sway, one or two reverses could not make me sit down doing nothing. Mirza Haidar describes him as being adorned with various virtues and clad with numberless excellences, above all which towered bravery and humanity. However, as we shall see in the next episode, his successor would squander all of Babar's conquests within a few years.